video I want to talk about first inversion chords. First inversion chords can be used frequently in harmonic progressions in the common practice era. Any of the diatonic chords can occur in first inversion, so it's a very common way of adding some variety to your harmonic progressions. A first inversion chord, as we know, puts the third of the chord in the bass. And that means that it has a kind of a brighter sound to it. It sort of sounds a little less grounded, a little less rooted. And that makes sense when you've removed the root of the chord from the bass. And that makes this chord quite an interesting color, even in a chord progression. So, as we look at first inversion chords, let's remind ourselves of what we're dealing with here. First of all, here's a root position chord. This would have 5-3 written under it, or in fact it would have nothing written under it because it's a root position chord in figured bass. And the root position chord has a strong root in the bass. When you have a first inversion chord, here we have 3 C major first inversion chords, we would have the third of the chord in the bass. This is a C, E, G chord with the E, the third of the chord, in the bass. That would be noted in figured bass by 6. Officially it would be noted by 6-3, but we don't write the 3, so you would just have 6. And that would tell you that it is a 6-3 or first inversion chord. It would tell you that you are dealing with the E as the third of the chord, and therefore the other two notes must be a C and a G to create the triad. Now, this particular first inversion chord demonstrates one of the ways that the chord is often found written out. When you write a first inversion chord, because you've used the third of the chord in the bass, and because we tend to try and avoid doubling the third of the chord, it's certainly in primary triads, sometimes in other chords it's less of an issue to double the third, but because we sometimes try and avoid doubling the third, then that means that you create the upper voices from doubling either the root or the fifth. In this case we've doubled the root, so we've got 2 C's and a G, and the E is in the bass. Here we've doubled the fifth, 2 G's and a C, and we have put still, of course, the third in the bass. So we have the chord constructed over the third of the chord with either then the root or the fifth doubled, and that makes logical sense. You've got 3 notes, you've put the third of the chord in the bass, and that kind of takes it out of play, so now you double one of the other notes to create the rest of the chord and create a 4-part structure. Works perfectly fine, right? So here we have a first inversion C major chord, first inversion C major chord. Here's the other possibility, again a first inversion C major chord. In this case, however, we've gone ahead and doubled the third of the chord. So C, E, G is the chord. It's in first inversion because E is the bass note. We've doubled that E, and then of course that's left us a C and a G to fill in the rest of the chord and make sure we have a complete 4-voice chord with 1 note doubled. This is certainly doable. This can happen. You are more likely to find these, but this is certainly doable. Because of the way that you double either the root or the fifth, sometimes these chords can occur looking like this as well. Again, I'm not really putting up anything different here, just moving the C into the tenor part and doubling the G in the soprano and alto. It is perfectly acceptable for a moment for 2 voice parts to sing the same note. They cannot do it for more than 1 chord because then you're down to 3-part harmony. But if they came together just for a moment and then separated again, that would be perfectly fine. So you could have a first inversion chord, or honestly any chord in any inversion, where for a moment 2 voices are singing the same pitch, the same note. Not really any different from 2 voices singing an octave apart, except it just happens to be closer together. So that's also another possibility. The bottom line is that to create a first inversion chord, the third of the chord is in the bass. Remember, that is the defining factor of a first inversion chord, and then really what you do above depends on context and depends on the circumstances of where you're coming from and where you're going to, which is the case with any chord in a progression that we've been talking about or will talk about. It's all about context and how you interpret your chord and how you place your chord in the context of a progression. Couple of things to watch with first inversion chords, because this is important. When you have successive, that is to say when you have more than one first inversion chord right after each other, say you had, say, a 4/6 chord go into a 5/6 chord, or sometimes you can even have 3 first inversion chords one after another. The nature of first inversion chords following each other is that there is a much greater chance of fifths and octaves. So I'm giving you a heads up. If you have an exercise, if you have an assignment where you have to write 2 or 3 first inversion chords right after each other, they can be different chords, a 4 chord in first inversion to a 5 chord in first inversion. The chords can be different, but if they are in first inversion and they are following each other exactly, in succession, then you need to be particularly aware that you can get yourselves into fifths and octaves very, very easily. And to avoid that, you may find that you have to kind of do some unusual voice leading, that you're going to break your voice leading guidelines. You're going to maybe move some notes. You're not going to be able to repeat notes. You might not be able to move notes by step. You may have to move notes by a much larger leap than you would like. It may seem and feel a little bit awkward, but you have to do that to avoid fifths and octaves. And it's perfectly fine to have your parts leaping around a bit if that's the only way to avoid fifths and octaves. It's not okay to have parts leaping around if you can keep them smooth. If you can't keep them smooth and avoid fifths and octaves, then you're going to have a little bit of leaping about going on in some of the parts. And you may have to do that if you have more than one first inversion chord in a row, in a succession. That may happen occasionally, as I say. First inversion chords, very common. You'll find them in many of your harmonic progressions that you'll be analysing, or harmonic progressions that you will write. And in fact now you should start to think about how you can incorporate first inversion chords into your harmonic progressions. And we'll look at some examples in class, and you'll start to construct some of your own examples based on the information you know. Thank you.